That was the president talking about the fight against terrorism, but the increasing drone wars across the world, especially in the context of growing inequality at home, which has become a major subject of the Democratic presidential candidates. Your sense of how the president has done in this area?
That's a great question, Juan. A few thoughts. One, let's be clear about this. With all due respect to President Obama, he has deported more people than George Bush deported. He has used drones to kill more innocent women and children than George Bush killed. We have a drone program on steroids, and so we kind of dance around these things. Let's just come to the truth of what the facts tell us, what the data tell us, and that's the reality. He's killed more innocent women and children with drones than George Bush did. Having said that, it's also telling to me that while he got a nice applause line on the authorization issue, the Republicans have had far less issue with this president on foreign policy than they have on his domestic agenda. And that ought to tell you something, that Republicans more often than not have been with him on his foreign policy agenda than they have opposed him and obstructed him, quite frankly, on his domestic policy agenda. So that's important, number two. But thirdly, what's really fascinating for me, the last time I was here, I think I was here talking about my book on Dr. King, Death of a King, about the last year in King's life. And it is always fascinating for me to watch this president pivot in any speech to a Kingian notion. In this particular speech, it was unarmed truth, as Medea Benjamin mentioned earlier, unarmed truth and unconditional love. That's at the heart of every speech that Martin gave, unarmed truth and unconditional love. So you pivot to quote Martin on the one hand, but what Martin was talking about, as we all know, at the end of his life, was that triple threat facing our democracy. It's King who says that if we don't deal with this triple threat, we're going to lose our democracy. What is the triple threat? Racism, poverty, and militarism. So for all that Barack Obama has, in fact, accomplished, and I must say, against a strong headwind, against a lot of obstructionism, he got some things done. But for all that he did accomplish, I judge this president, this is just me, since you asked me, this is my assessment, Juan. I judge this president and any other president by where they stand vis-a-vis or in relationship to King's legacy and that triple threat. Where do you stand? What did you do on racism, poverty, and militarism? Now, if that's the scorecard that we're grading this president on, it's a very different conversation that we could have about what he has and hasn't gotten done.
Well, talk about that. Yeah. When a few years ago we were talking to, I can't remember where, I think it was Ohio, when you were on a poverty tour. Mm-hmm. But you've written The Covenant with Black America 10 years later. You wrote it in 2006. Interestingly, it basically covers the Obama presidency.
Yeah,
and there's a greater poverty percent.
There's no doubt about
percent of people in poverty now than there were when the president came in.
There's no doubt about it. Poverty is threatening our very democracy. And not just that, speaking of national security, poverty is not a matter of national security. These numbers are just not sustainable. So again, on racism, poverty, and militarism, the grade's not so good. But you have Alicia Garza on this program today, and it is amazing, again, that in this era of the first black president, black boys and black men are being shot dead in the streets, and too many cops are getting away with that. In this era, black women are still dying disproportionately from preventable diseases. In this era, black children are still struggling to gain access to an equal high-quality education. In this era, environmental racism abounds. In this era, the digital divide still exists. And so progress has been made, but it's just troubling for me, and what the book gets to, Amy, is how the president's most loyal constituency over that period, the book is not about Obama, it's about, again, where we are 10 years later, but it does, as you point out, cover most of his presidency. But how does the president's most loyal constituency end up being the group that falls the farthest behind? Look at the gay and lesbian community. I celebrate this, but look at what they've accomplished over the last 10 years because they made demands. The environmentalists have something to celebrate because they made demands. Wall Street always gets what it wants. It's always in celebration. But the president's most loyal constituency, not much to celebrate.
Well, Black Lives Matter certainly emerged during this period, Alicia Garza. Talk about what you think was the greatest progress you made. And, I mean, President Obama is not at the end of his term. This is his last State of the Union address. He still has another year. What can the president do, and what do you feel must be left to people in the streets?
Sure. Well, first, let me talk about what I think we've accomplished, because to be quite frank, even though President Obama did not speak in the way that that many would have wanted him to, in the State of the Union address about race and racism. The reality is that there is a conversation that is happening all over the world about race, state-sanctioned violence, and racism that has not happened in this way in, quite a long time. And I think that that is a very significant, very, very significant advance. Additionally, what I heard yesterday was that many people, and many of the congressional Black caucus members in particular, have been talking about various proposals for criminal justice. And without, rubber stamping any of those proposals, I do think it's important that this issue has come up and is being moved, right, in a positive way. But to be really, really frank, I think the biggest thing that we've accomplished is pressure from the outside and to say, we're not endorsing Democrats or Republicans. Both are equally culpable for the conditions that Black folks are facing in this country and around the world. And so certainly what my hope would be is that there is an independent political force that is building in this country that will move a different type of agenda that will prioritize people and the planet over profits. That's my hope. Certainly, I think Obama, it is his last year, and he still has time left. And I think what we should be pushing him around in particular is to use his power of executive order. I mean, quite certainly, Obama has really explicitly talked about race only a handful of times in the 8 years that he's been president. And quite frankly, I think the sentiments that I've been hearing is that we can't wait any longer. Again, when I was sitting in that chamber last night, all I could think about was Sandra Bland's family. And how did Sandra Bland end up dead in a jail cell that she shouldn't have been in the first place? As I was sitting in the chamber last night, all I could think about was, when we're talking about unemployment rates dropping, I'm thinking, yes, for everybody but Black women. When we're talking about gun violence, I'm thinking to myself, well, what about violence that's also impacting the transgender community, where we had a little more than 25 murders of trans people of color, and most of them Black trans people. And then, of course, I'm thinking about the raids that have been happening in the beginning of this year. And I do think that Obama, while he kind of noted that it's an election year and that he was acknowledging a quote-unquote political reality that not much might move this year, I do think that he can exercise more leadership and move things through his power as president through the tool of executive order. Now, yes, that's going to make Republicans angry, but quite frankly, I think that if anything's going to shift, we're going to need to see some leadership. I understand this notion of bipartisanism, but for many of our communities, we can't wait for people to reach across the aisle and figure out how to compromise. There does have to be some leadership for a progressive agenda that is really centralizing the needs of our communities who are, quite frankly, under attack.
Alicia Garza, we have to take a break. Co-founder of Black Lives Matter, Special Projects Director for the National Domestic Workers Alliance, attended Obama's State of the Union address. Pivotal also in the $15 an hour, the push for the $15 an hour minimum wage. Stay with us.